So good evening, everybody. Yes, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our final meeting of our scrutiny panel on housing and environment. Although, of course, it may not necessarily be our final meeting if we carry on into the next municipal year as well. So we'll just see how that goes on that. So first of all, if I just ask about any apologies for absence.
None, Chair.
Thank you. Right. And also just on the format of the meeting tonight, we are hybrid meetings, so there might be people joining us online. So please do indicate online as well if you do wish to speak. So then first of all, then I'm trying to get through the briefing note here as well, just on my phone. So I'll just be with you. Oh, thank you. That's very kind. Yes, thanks. So if I can just ask about is any urgent matters that needs to be brought forward. Thank you in that case. Can I ask for any declarations of interest?
Yes, Chair, I would like to declare that I do apply for selective licensings on behalf of clients of my business.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. So I don't know if there's anyone. Okay, and Ben Toomey, please.
You'll have to tell me if I have to do this every time, but I'm from Generation Rent and we're a non-profit campaigning on behalf of tenants across the UK.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so yes, to move on from there. So we haven't got any matters to be considered in private as far as I'm aware. We can look at the minutes of the meeting that we held on the 23rd of November. So we just see if they're correct and accepted. So we'll look at page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, and page 10. Right, I think that's all in order. Great, thank you. So in that case, we might just get on to our first item on the agenda there, to our first substantive item. It's been great, actually. I just arrived at the meeting today, I had a look at my phone and just saw a headline saying that the Renters Reform Bill might not be happening because things are happening. So I thought that's going to put us in a really good mood for tonight. But we'll see what we can do in order to move on and to continue to progress. So what we did do, I suppose we could rate this item first, is that we did a site visit. So we went to an HMO. So that did that with Councillor Martin and also Ben Toomey from Generation Rent. So I don't know if either of you would like to perhaps report back and mention a few perspectives which you had on the day. Okay. Yes. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thanks to Joe and the team for taking us along to the visit. It was, really useful for us as a scrutiny panel, I think, to see firsthand your officers in action. And I was impressed by the professionalism and the experience of the officers as well. I think the relationship is very clear that, between the licensing officers, the tenants and the landlords and managing agents as well. So I think that's useful that they get that broad perspective and try and handle issues. The case, I don't think we're going to go into detail on the kind of visit that we did, but the case did throw up a lot of issues around wider council responsibilities. And it was a good reminder, I think, that housing can't be seen in isolation. There's also mental health challenges, there's social care challenges. And in this instance, we were looking at some temporary accommodation too. So there's the massive cost to the council of providing temporary accommodation, which kind of shows how Joe and his team, I think, are doing everything they can with the limited resources that they've got in order to tackle what's basically a very complex problem. And I'd be missing a trick if I didn't talk about the Renters Reform Bill and the fact that the government needs to get its act together, basically, to help you out in a local sense on this. One thing that did surprise me was talking through with the licensing officers about the enforcement actions that are taken. I think there's clearly a very sort of tailored route to enforcement when it happens, but the two officers that we met, who were both had many years experience, hadn't actually gone as far as looking at banning orders for any landlords in the borough. So I'd just be interested to get a view of whether or not the enforcement the teeth actually reach a limit, or are we saying that Ealing Borough has every landlord that is willing to respond well to an enforcement notice and get their act together and perform exceptionally, which would surprise me, but I'm happy to be challenged back if that's the case. But overall, really useful visit, and I think this scrutiny panel would benefit from doing more of those visits if we're reformed in the future.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Joe. Honestly, it was an eye-opening experience. Stephen Phillips, fantastic. I've got to say they do provide what we as a local authority want to see. I'd be interested just to know how many properties they manage on behalf of the local authority. But I've got to agree with Ben on it. It really was just unbelievable just to what is available out there. Our social care problems were really highlighted, I think, just on that other one visit we did. And it just shows just how difficult a job it is for any local authority at the moment. I'm not just saying it's just Ealing, I think just across the board, just how difficult it is. I'm also a little bit, I suppose, intrigued a little bit as to what areas are selected, i.e. across the borough, and really just how well our sort of health and care, social care sector work with us in a housing setup, and what support is given to the tenants or the occupiers of these properties. Because, I mean, we saw a sorry scene, really, of an individual who obviously had left and been taken into social care. And it was very depressing. And again, what support mechanism we're providing for the occupiers of that property, having seen that situation develop. And I think that's quite important from our point of view, just to see what support is there for them. But overall, I think the property that we saw was adequate. It was well presented. It had excellent facilities, far better facilities than I've seen in some of the private rented sector. So I've got to be honest, well done, Joe and the team on that. So yeah, that's my sort of view.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. And also thank you to Ben Toomey for your perspectives on that one. I suppose for myself, but we're going around, I mean, I kept asking questions about maintenance and how it was looked after, for example, the communal areas, how that was looked after, because I'd lived in so many HMOs myself over time of different varying levels of how well they were kept or whatever. And so, you know, often it'd be a case of you're trying to get a rota going for people to clean the communal areas, but it's nice to see that communal areas were actually looked after. I think that probably could help in order to ensure that there is better cohesiveness within the residents who are there, the people living there, because they're not necessarily just arguing with each other the whole time about cleaning. And so that was quite useful. And it just overall, just seeing how it's all changing, that we are showing a bit more respect for people in those situations. One thing I do remember, there was one HMO I was in Brentford years ago, and I remember one morning about 4 a.m, the landlord and his son decided to raid the home just to see if any of us were getting up to anything that we're not supposed to be doing. And I thought that was actually quite out of order, really. So then after that, there were some people who were staying there who shouldn't have been. So of course the landlord made a regular point of actually going around there. But then I was like looking into HMOs and seeing what the current situation is. And it was actually after the experience that I had, it was quite pleasing to see that in 2021 in Kensington and Chelsea, that the council got the chance to raid an HMO for 22 with 22 bedrooms, and you know, and find the owners like £500,000, because there were so many issues there when it came to health and safety, and it came to cleanliness, and it came to everything else. So that was quite pleasing in a way to see that, in one sense, that the tenants are coming first now. That we know that things are improving, because people do have to be in this situation. It's something I'll touch on later when we ask Joe questions about this item later. But people do need to be in this situation. There's no reason why they should be looked upon as somehow inferior citizens, and so it's good that they get a few more rights than they used to. And so I was glad to see that people were being looked after in the HMO Northolt that we went to see. So in that case, if I could just have introduced then Joe Blanchard, our Head of Environmental Health and Trading Standards, to talk to us about HMOs and talk to us about the property licensing, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rice. I don't know if we want to restate some of the questions that I was asked, and just in that introduction. First thing I would just say is, I know you thanked me, but it's my officers that do all of the work. They're considering that there's around 55,000 private rented properties, and we're talking about a staff group of around 25 that don't just deal with licensed properties or even just private sector housing. They also deal with drainage, filthy and verminous, hoarding, Building Act safety, cladding remediation. Resourcing is very tight, and demand certainly exceeds capacity. There's a number of issues you've raised that are just endemic with the housing market at the moment, cost of living, and all of these kind of things. And Ben's absolutely right. It's a system, and we are one small piece in that system. And we attempt to take a holistic approach to things, but often you've mentioned health and social care. I'm sure there's a health and social care scrutiny panel that hear exactly the same issues with capacity and demand. Just on, banning orders, we haven't prosecuted a landlord for a number of years. We have issued civil penalty notices, but not for a couple of years. We certainly need to restart all of that again. Banning orders, they're obviously issued by the first tier property tribunal on our request. So we need to start taking cases to first tier property tribunal. I'm going to get on to increasing that sort of activity a bit later on. Just in terms of some of the overview with renters' rights and that kind of thing, I'll just quickly mention in the council plan, one of the deliverables is that by 2026, Ealing Council will help renters to establish a private renters association in the borough. At my service is doing some exploratory work at the moment with renters groups on what that might look like, and how that might work. Because while it's called a private renters association, we actually probably need to ask renters what they would like, whether it is a renters association, a support forum, or whatever. So to have a truly led by and for renters group, we need to ask renters. So that's where we're at in that process. But that should hopefully start having a forum where renters can scrutinise and challenge what we're doing, whether it's the council specifically, colleagues in public health, or whether it's the NHS colleagues, CCGs, etc. So so there's some big aspirations with that. But we have to start by actually finding out from renters what they like. It's one of those things where we want to hold the space but not fill the space. Anyway, I need to rush through this presentation to keep your timing and answer your questions. So I'm just going to start with a quick recap. Obviously, I came to panel in June 2023 when the larger selective scheme was about 3 months in. All full of myself and pleased with how the scheme has been going. That has largely continued, although it has caused some issues. But I'll just quickly recap. So there are around 150,000 dwellings in the borough. About 40% are owner occupied, 40% private rented, and 20% registered provider, so council or housing association run. One of the reasons that the licensing scheme was implemented is because overall our stock condition modelling had shown that around 22% of properties in Ealing's private rented sector had one or more category 1 hazards, whereas the English national average is around 13%. And the chart on the right just shows the disproportionate spread of the prevalence of hazards in different pre-May 2022 wards. So our licensing schemes really for selective properties, they hinge around those charts there, but I'll talk a little bit more about that. So one of the reasons why we use property licensing is it's a mechanism to improve the private rented sector. A big thing is it requires landlords to proactively approach the council, identify themselves and obtain a license. It allows us to set some very clear standards for management and physical conditions. Section 21 eviction notices, they're not valid if they're issued in relation to a property that's unlicensed. And if a landlord fails to license, then the tenants of that property can apply for a rent repayment order and have up to 12 months worth of rent repaid. And from our perspective as the local housing enforcement authority, we can issue civil penalties for non-compliance, such as failure to license or contravening the conditions. So just a reminder, there's three types of licensing present in the borough. That's mandatory HMOs, which are large houses of multiple occupation of 5 or more people. Additional HMOs, it's 3 or 4 people, and selectives, which is single families or 2 unrelated people. So just was worth noting, the mandatory HMOs is called mandatory because every borough and council has to have that in place. Additional is something optional that the council can choose to implement. And selective schemes, again, is an optional thing. If they're particularly large schemes, the councils have to apply to the Secretary of State for approval with the Department of Levelling Up, which we did successfully. We did a lot of landlord engagement around implementing the schemes. We wanted to have really good evidence that we'd done all that we could reasonably to inform landlords of their responsibilities to license in certain areas. We offered some discounts for early applications received in the first 3 months, and we offered some other discounts for having a particularly energy efficient property or being a member of a recognised landlord accreditation scheme. The full selective license is £750, which equates to around £12.50 per month. But I have to point out that landlords don't have the option to pay £12.50 a month. That's £750 up front. So just to give the panel a reminder, the overview across the borough is basically the green and orange areas. Every type of private rented property requires a license. In the green areas, it's HMOs only. So all in all, our modelling indicates there's just over 40,000 properties that are potentially licensable in the borough. This rather complicated table is probably to demonstrate how complex the licensing schemes are, in that we have really at this time 2 what I would call legacy licensing schemes in place. So these were licensing schemes that started in 2017, and there are still licenses which were issued under that scheme in effect right now. We have 3 live schemes, those green ones, the additional, the 2 selectives, and mandatory HMO licensing is always in place. Our enforcement plan over the lifetime of the schemes is given in blue at the bottom. So with the change in the financial year, we're about to flip from a kind of encourage to license to a enforce to secure licensing. So we're looking to implement a very focused enforcement and compliance function to our teams. And that's, I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. So our kind of first financial year's worth of data is here. By January, someone has pointed out that second bullet point isn't very well written. What I was trying to say was, by the first anniversary of the larger selective licensing scheme, which came into effect in January 2023. So by the first anniversary, which is January 2024, 42% of expected potentially licensable properties had made an application for a license. So I apologise for that, because that can be very easily misconstrued. We've carried out some level of inspection and investigation and enforcement notices. But as I say, this coming financial year, the 2024-25 years, when we expect to start having this ramped up. To give an overview of our progress with processing licensing applications, that red line is the total number of applications made that are yet to be determined. So you can see a nearly exponential growth in the first few months of the scheme. And it's only now, really over Christmas, that the lines are all going in the right direction in terms of the numbers of licenses yet to be determined are going down. For a long while, we were receiving more applications than we were issuing and determining licenses, and that has accounted for the accumulation of applications. I mentioned this at the previous panel, but most licensing schemes experience around 10 to 20% of expected applications being made in the first year. We've received 42%. So we had wholly misjudged the new demographic of landlords, and they're far more compliant than we had anticipated. So, you know, in an ideal world, you would communicate to people through, you know, the billboard advertising campaigns, radio, around Ealing, that licensing is required. And in an ideal world, everyone would license, but we don't live in an ideal world. And normally it's around 10 to 20%. But yeah, my apologies to Ealing's landlord community. I'd underestimated your compliance, and many more had come forward with just the communications campaign. What the next financial year is going to be about is about starting to door knock, starting to carry out investigations with a view to, if people continue to refuse to license or fail to license, considering enforcement action, your civil penalty notices, etc. I will jump through this slide because this is just me saying that the application process is not as straightforward as simply deciding that a license should be granted. There are a number of verification checks that we have to carry out. We have to consult with interested parties, which may include mortgage companies, for their comments about whether they have any representations to be made about the license application itself. Just to address the panel about property licensing processing, we are expanding the team significantly to help us deal with the processing of licenses by recruiting permanent staff. And then the next phase, which we're about to go through, is to get a really focused licensing enforcement and compliance team in place. Most of this will be made from officers doing work currently on property licensing, but it will be led with a narrow focus on property licensing enforcement and compliance. So just ahead to the objectives for 24 to 25, we need to reduce the number of applications yet to be determined. With the recruitment of that staff, we will be making sure that performance is high so that we can look to reduce the time that people have to wait for their application to be determined. We'll start implementing a comprehensive enforcement and compliance plan. I split this into two things. One is search and license, so find those unlicensed properties and get them licensed. And the other one is to inspect properties that have been licensed and make sure they're complying with the conditions. And then the other thing which might be of interest to the committee is we're currently exploring the concept of having a dual authorised officer or officers that work across our community safety and property licensing teams, so they can use either or both the community safety legislation or the property licensing frameworks to reduce antisocial behaviour in HMOs, which I'm sure many of you will have received concerns about in your constituency mailboxes. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much then, Joe. So I'll just open up for questions, please, from the panel members. Oh, Councillor Ball, please.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, one question was on the additional HMO licensing scheme, so the one that, you know, applies throughout the borough. Could you explain which blocks of flats it applies to? So where they're self-contained flats, when do they count as an HMO under that legislation, please?
Sorry, if it's a unit with 3 to 4 people living in there that share amenity, then that would be an additional HMO. I'm purposely being a bit vague with that answer because what you're talking about is something also called Section 257 HMOs, and there's specific legislation that applies if the property was converted before a certain time without building regulations approval. And I have to admit, I can't answer off the top of my head questions about that around Section 257 because it's quite a technical definition. Have I gone anywhere near answering your question, Councillor Ball?
Yeah. I mean, I found it difficult to understand. That's what I'm talking about. Is conversion. Old properties converted into flats, whether they count as an HMO under this section or not, is something I've found it difficult to get to the bottom of. Yeah.
I would advise anyone with a specific property to contact the property licensing scheme. We have recognised that this is an issue because we do have in the borough and in a lot of other boroughs, because the property market is so overcooked and demand is so high for private rented properties that you're getting a load of conversions of all different types of properties. So we're actually finding you've maybe got converted properties, so they have a Section 257 license, and within that there's a number of selectives, a number of additionals, etc. And you're even getting people purpose built making new developments that include this. So you may have seen things like communal apartment blocks that include like a working from home area, and some of those will be individual private rented flats, and so selectives, and some of them will be the more communal HMOs. Thanks.
Yes, please.
So yeah, an unrelated question. On the private tenants, what was it called? Well, no, the
Private Renters Association.
Private Renters Association. Sorry, yes, I was on the right page. Yeah, I just wondered how that will be publicised, how you recruit people to get involved in it, because obviously the private renters are a massive chunk of the borough population.
Yes, this is the challenge: is can you truly harness the voice of public renters in one place? So we're beginning by delivering some workshops, which is the aim is to improve awareness of renters' rights, but we're going to use that in addition to get some ideas from renters in those groups at those workshops around their thoughts about what a private renters association might look like. So it's actually at quite an early stage. So Private Renters Association is the title that's been given in the council plan. It may be something different. Our boroughs do similar things, but the aspiration has been clear that it should be something that's run by renters and led by renters for renters. The question is how we facilitate that without it becoming Ealing Council's Private Renters Association rather than the Ealing Private Renters Association.
Yeah, and just yeah. I mean, I guess what I would thank you for that answer. I absolutely agree that it should be run by the renters. I mean, I'm just thinking, is it the sort of thing where there would be included in the emails to all residents you've got email addresses for and around Ealing, that sort of mass, mass contact rather than just people already on your radar?
Yeah, it would need to be even wider than that, because there are private renters groups that are either English as a second language, literacy problems, digitally excluded, or just simply not on our mailing list. So yeah, with the workshops we're looking to deliver are specifically going in for people that are unlikely to be able to access that kind of thing. So yeah, it needs to be wide ranging. Yeah, it's a big piece of work.
Ben Toomey, please.
Thanks, Joe, for the presentation. I may be able to help with that work that you're doing about the association. I'll send you a report that we did recently on participation of renters, and refer to my former interest as well. We do sometimes provide consultancy to councils on that, on participation of renters in council work. But I'll send you the report for free. So I've got 3 questions actually, and they're all unrelated. And it might be worth more of a discussion than just question and answer. The first one is the rent repayment orders for which are accessible by tenants if their property isn't licensed and should be. Do you monitor how many tenants are using that scheme?
No, we don't.
Okay, fair enough. Is it possible to, or is this like a conscious decision or something that's just you can't be done?
Sorry, do you want to do these one at a time, or I'm happy? Yeah, okay, great. We don't. It's more of a capacity issue, if I'm honest, because but what we are looking to do with in conjunction with Justice for Tenants is do some pieces of work about how we can work in conjunction to uncover unlicensed properties and be involved with rent repayment orders at the same time. So, for example, if people contact us to report an unlicensed property, which we want to be quite a streamlined process where people can easily submit their tenancy agreement or information that makes it very easy for us to pursue an unlicensed property civil penalty notice, for example, we need to make sure we're giving them information about rent repayment orders at the same time, and vice versa. But I know some authorities offer services where they will help tenants pursue rent repayment orders. We don't do that.
That's great, thank you. The Mayor of London has a license checker you might be aware of online, which is quite well used in some boroughs, and therefore quite easy to promote if you put it out in your usual channels, I think. The word of mouth around that can be really effective, both from tenants who inform other tenants to have a look, and also between landlords who may get stung and then realise, tell you mate they need to sign up. So I would recommend that might be something that we could recommend as a scrutiny panel. I don't know. My second area is about the property licensing staffing. You said is expanding, which is great. Based on our visit, I think that was clear that there are a lot of properties to visit and to process. I could see from your chart that the property licensing processing officers, there's about 8 new roles within that team, but there's also the licensing enforcement and compliance team. Are they staying the same then? And this is just to get through that backlog of processing applications, is it?
Yes. So the processing, licensing, so managing a solvent and successful property licensing scheme is a challenge, and you need to be regularly evaluating income and other activities and making sure that you've got the right ratio of processing, enforcement, and compliance going on. I think that's where the that's where the fun is. I don't mean that. That's where being on top of it and diligent is really key. So at the moment, right now, the challenge before us is to make sure that we are processing license applications as quickly as possible. The process itself is actually an intervention, because we are making sure that landlords comply with at least the minimum that the applications require. And when we're picking up on people that have submitted a picture from their holidays rather than the picture of the gas safety certificate and things like that as we go through. And so the property licensing enforcement and compliance aspect, we already have staff in-house that are doing that kind of work, but we're going to have a dedicated team. So we've just recruited a property licensing manager to coordinate the role as a whole, because I've talked before about this, and the cyclical nature of it. So to have applications coming in, I need to make sure, particularly at the tail end of the scheme, that there's a reason for landlords to apply, which would be the threat of action or moral duty as well. But so I need a team that's actually provides that threat. And we also then need to inspect the properties. That needs to be funded by the license application. So you need that whole ecosystem working together. The kickstart to this is to have the process done and the applications in and the license fees in. And we're almost like priming the enforcement and compliance ready to go. So I'm hoping that manager will make a difference to coordinating that, and we'll have some further recruitment going on to bolster what we're already doing.
Thank you. That's great. Just getting into the weeds a bit, which I think is what this panel's for. Does that mean that these are temporary roles then that are coming into the team, or
this is what's taken? No, they're not. They're permanent roles. They're permanent recruitment. And I mean, we have the council here has a policy that if you're employed, for example, on a fixed term contract for more than 12 months, you're treated as a permanent member of staff. Plus, I talked last time about the huge challenge with recruiting experienced, competent staff, and so offering a 1-year fixed term post or a 2-year fixed term post is going to significantly reduce the amount of interested candidates. And we need to be, everyone around us is doing property licensing. I think Brent have got quite a big scheme going live, and I need to beat them to it, to be frank.
Great, very helpful, thank you. And then my final point, it goes back to the initial question that I asked about your enforcement around revoking licenses or banning orders, etc. You said that there hasn't been any prosecution taken to a tribunal in recent years. Should this panel be reassured that that's going to change in the coming years? And if we are, then how? Like, what's different in the next couple of years than in the last couple of years?
Yeah, the focus we're going to put on enforcement and compliance. So the other thing that we need to bear in mind is the schemes, while it seems ages away, the schemes come to an end in March 2027 and January 2028. And it will be beholden upon us, particularly if we have any aspirations for, or when I say we, I mean the council, so not necessarily me, but if they have aspirations for extending licensing or continuing licensing or having more licensing, we'll need to demonstrate that the property licensing scheme was effective and then it actually improved conditions. So we will need the relevant data, and there are times when I think we can take enforcement action. We do often actually solve the real, the issue at hand, whatever, the heating gets fixed within the reasonable time or whatever it is. However, there's an argument in that we do have a graduated enforcement approach, but there's an argument that there is a kind of justice element in there that needs to be looked at. But no, our objective is to use the full framework available with property licensing, including CPNs. And, we've developed quite an extensive license conditions, and we mean it. The license holders need to comply with the license conditions. And if they don't, there's penalties. So yeah, I'm happy to come, let's say next year, maybe 18 months, and talk about enforcement that we've done by then back to the panel if you'd like.
I think that would be great because if we could be reassured that there was no landlord operating within the licensing scheme who was unfit to be a landlord in the way that they operated, then that would be great. But bearing in mind that's unlikely given the number of properties that there are and the conditions that you've identified, particularly in Southall, for example, where you've got 1 in every 2 properties with a category 1, a pretty immediate threat to actual health. Then I think that's unlikely. So it would be useful to see if there's been enforcement against some of those that you would probably say are unfit to hold a license. Great, thank you.
Councillor Martin, please.
Thanks, Joe. I suppose the 15,268 applications that came in was a great success, and back to the wonderful webinars that were put on. And I think, whilst we're here to scrutinise, I think there's also a good line here to say well done to our landlords out there who have successfully put in, but the work behind the scenes of putting the webinars together. And having attended all 3 webinars, that one specifically for tenants, one for landlords, and the third was for estate agents, believe it or not. And I think the message got out there very, very quickly that licensing was here and it was across the borough. So well done on that. Property Mark's probably a good avenue for you to look at as well in relation to speaking to via them. They would talk to agents, and I think that will assist us in getting tenants to come forward, particularly those that may be unhappy with their current situation. So I think Property Mark's definitely someone that we can look at. All agents should be licensed to them.
Should I just say I agree?
So any other questions from anyone? Okay. Oh, Councillor Jessel, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to know if the landlord loses their license, can they apply for another one, and will there be conditions attached, or how does it work, please?
Do you mean they have their license revoked?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Well, to have the license revoked, there's a set of prescribed circumstances in which a license might be revoked. Probably, I would anticipate maybe over the lifetime of a scheme this big that there might be a revocation or 2 or more. And then normally that would be for a significant breach of the license conditions, or sometimes it can be if there's no fit and proper person to run the property. So to have a breach of license conditions, yeah, I don't. if they're not a fit and proper person, they wouldn't be able to get the license in the first place. I'm just wondering what we would do if we would revoke the license. I can take that away, actually. If we revoke the license for breach of conditions, I have to say I don't know what they would. I don't know what we would do, because it would depend on the situation. I think.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other further points from anybody? Okay. I mean, what I suppose I could ask about is probably touching a bit more about what I said earlier, about, because with HMOs, often they're just seen as I said, some kind of second class citizens in a way that your people, you're not wanted in that neighbourhood if you're going to be living in an HMO. But of course, now we're getting to a stage where I think people are more and more in need of that kind of accommodation because of house prices and actual rent, even basic rents for one bedrooms. So it's become more and more common for people of my age or older, even older than me, so need to have somewhere to live as well, and need to be in an HMO. And so really, I suppose one thing I'd like to see is how we can try and improve the reputation of HMOs generally. And I'm wondering if the licensing scheme could do some of that, because maybe it can ensure that those homes are not quite as much of a perceived eyesore in the neighbourhood as they might have done otherwise. Just in terms of, well, with the kind of with that is the kind of status that people have in those HMOs. And so it'd be a case to seeing if can the licensing scheme ensure that we get a better reputation because of the way that the place is better kept, and can we deal with some of those kind of myths and some of those kind of unfounded fears that people have. For example, will be wary of there being lots of parking at an HMO, which to me doesn't really make sense, especially in some parts of the country, because if all you can afford is that HMO room or bedsit or whatever, you won't necessarily be able to afford to have a car. And so they always assume that maybe the HMO might be very loud, and but it doesn't necessarily mean just because you're all living in lots of people in one place, you're necessarily going to be having parties together. So how can we try and get rid of some of those myths? And also the idea of, as well, does it necessarily mean that the value of your property goes down if you're in the same street as an HMO? Does that kind of thing truly happen, or can we do something to stop those myths from circulating? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Yeah, there's a few things tied up in there. Planning has a big role to play in this. So under planning law, you can make an Article 4 direction to I think it's to cap. This shows my complete lack of planning knowledge. Sorry, planners. But I think you can cap the amount of HMOs in an area dependent on some tests. Ealing doesn't have an Article 4 direction. I think well over half of London boroughs have got Article 4 directions. And there is this perception of HMOs, but you're absolutely right. They're a completely needed and valid tenure type for a number of demographics in the borough. And I think that the planning conversation is around. So my officers deal with, there's an HMO here. Is it of good condition? Is it well managed? The planning question is, should this HMO even be here in the first place? So I think we start, things like around parking, especially, it is a planning issue. But yeah, I mentioned at the end of the presentation about we're looking to have a kind of dual authorised community safety stroke property licensing officer to deal with some of these issues, because we've looked at some evidence, and I think off the top of my head, so please don't quote me, but I think antisocial behaviour is is more prevalent, disproportionately prevalent in HMOs than it is any other tenure type. However, the people most negatively impacted by that ASB are the other tenants of the HMO. So that causes an issue. Also, the property license conditions, they relate to how the property license holder should behave. They don't govern tenant behaviour. So all the license conditions do is they say about how the landlord should manage reports of antisocial behaviour, cooperate with the police and others. So I think there is some work to do there, but arguably it's it's for the community leaders kind of thing, right? I don't know that there's I have the regulatory tools to change hearts and minds.
It's interesting, just you're saying about on the antisocial behaviour, because the thing that would happen when we went on our site visit is that there had been an incident with one of the residents there. I think the first we heard about it was the neighbour came out and said, "Well, is that situation still ongoing?" And then we could just turn around and say, "Well, no, it had been sorted out." And so I mean, that was really that was very much testament to how well the place was actually being managed in the first place. That there was a problem with one tenant, and so that was dealt with. And so it was very much the relief of that neighbour. And so that neighbour didn't appear to have any other issues with everything. So it probably wasn't necessarily a huge problem to her to be living next door to that person. But at the same time, that same issue that happened with that tenant in that HMO has happened to a person, in a flat on their own in my ward. So you can't necessarily make this kind of judgment. So I think it is interesting. But I can see that Ben Toomey wants to get in there. So yes, please.
Thanks. If I can just add on the antisocial behaviour point, I think it's important to distinguish actual antisocial behaviour and reports of antisocial behaviour. So this would be a higher prevalence of reports of antisocial behaviour, and that's down to a few things. One is that there's more people in the property than there would be potentially in another one. So you multiply by the number of people, how likely it might be to happen or be reported. There's the external perception that Councillor Rice has mentioned from other properties, and there's also you're more likely to encounter issues or see it as an issue affecting your day-to-day life enough to report if it's happening in your own house and there's strangers in a different room, for example. So those reports are driven up, but it's important if we're talking about the culture and the attitudes to this that we don't label people in HMOs as more likely to be antisocial. It's more like a reporting issue. Thanks.
Sorry, you're absolutely right to reprimand me for my use of it, but no, you're right, because there's a number of which is why I tried to be careful in how I said it, because there are issues with how I've said that figure, because it's reports of antisocial behaviour, and I think all the members on the panel would have received complaints that saying, there's an HMO on my street and it's the source of all the antisocial behaviour in the area. And so, I think what we're also hoping is these roles can actually provide a kind of holistic way of approaching that process, because as what it needs quite close working with the police as well in some cases, but also, I mean, I don't want to bring in more problems, raise more points, because that's not my role. But the question about, say, a problematic, for want of a better word, tenant often involves lots of other vulnerabilities as well. And also that person goes somewhere. So where do they might have left that HMO, but they need to go somewhere. I'd much prefer them to go to a well-managed HMO that's managed by someone that's capable of kind of dealing with that. But also someone mentioned it earlier about, certain types of accommodation for certain demographics of people. We're very committed to absolutely not have a kind of two-tier approach to accommodation. Like if people are, in a certain situation, or I don't know, that they were homeless and now they've been housed here. So this maybe they could put up with lower conditions. We're absolutely not for that. It's always quality over quantity, but that is a hard thing to do, because my officers have to face up to the fact that if a property is particularly bad and say we have to prohibit it, that person or that family goes into temporary accommodation, maybe hotels. I presented recently to our autism delivery group, and people with children with particular vulnerabilities, they do not like change. That's we have to look at the whole health and well-being of that family. That's a really difficult situation. So really, it's a shout out to my officers, because they're making these decisions all the time, and I don't think there's no easy answers. Anyway, thank you very much.
I'll just see if any other points or questions on that one. In that case, thank you very much then, Joe. Of course, I can leave you to enjoy your evening if you wish. And yes, I think that's been very, very helpful. Yes, and I'm sure we've got one or two recommendations from that to look at, which we can discuss later. Thank you. Yes, we've got some really interesting stuff to speak about, so we will. So in that case, So last year I was looking at the Rewild, Recycle, Reuse Committee, which has had so many words beginning with RE that I've probably actually forgotten the name of the committee and probably said it wrong already. But we had some very, very interesting points from that. So it'd be a very good opportunity now to sort of catch up on what's really new and what's the latest on that. So looking at the Acton Circular Economy Hub and just looking at how we can do a bit more to reuse items. If I can just please welcome Sarah Ellis, the Waste and Circular Economy Team Manager, and Earl Mackenzie, our Assistant Director of Street Services. Thank you.
So, first time on microphones in these committees. A lot of firsts for this evening. So I know you had a presentation about this last year, but I'm just going to give you some more information about how we've been moving this forward over the last year. We have taken steps which are outlined in the report, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what we've been doing. So Ealing Council and our residents are very good at the recycling economy, the middle picture on the slide here. Most people know and understand that just throwing stuff in the bin is not a great use of that. They've paid the money to buy them, they've used them, they don't want them anymore, but putting them in the bin does seem wasteful. But we are very good at putting them in the recycling bin, and Ealing has been in the top 3 in London with recycling rates for many years now. We have a very comprehensive doorstep service for houses and are getting there with the services for flats and flats above shops as well. But what we really need to do, in line with the council's vision for tackling climate change, reducing carbon emissions, and many of the other items that we're focusing on around good quality jobs and lovely neighbourhoods to live in and sense of community across the 7 towns that we have. Moving towards a circular economy, a term that the majority of people do not understand. Moving towards the point where we value the items that are purchased and do our utmost as citizens, organisations, businesses, as the council, to, instead of throwing something in the bin, to remake it, to perhaps return it, to refill it, to keep it in use for a lot longer, to redistribute items. We have a lot of items that are thrown away at the HRRC site in Greenford that could very easily have gone on and be used by other people for many years to come. And we need to think about how we can take that forward. And this is what the Acton Circular Economy Hub is looking to take forward. The circular system, by keeping the items in use for longer, makes better use of them. And the hub that we are putting in place is going to be a physical location where we can encourage people to take these steps that are needed, the change that is needed. So we've been working with the Statutory Waste Disposal Authority, West London Waste Authority. They are putting resources, both money and people, into this site, as are we. And we are also engaging with communities now. We're not waiting for this hub to exist. We're going out now into areas to see what people want, what they're already doing, what they would like us to help them with, how we could support them. So there is an Acton market on the first Saturday of every month, which is reuse and recycle focus, which is done with Action West London. And from May, because there isn't one in April, I've been told, we're going to be going along to that every time it is on. And we went to the February one. And we are supporting them and helping their action groups within that by taking them on visits to facilities so they can see what happens to waste and to other locations where repairing is done. We've worked very closely with the West Central London Fixers and the Ealing Repair Cafe with monthly events over the last 6 months where people can go along and get useful tips, practice their skills, get someone to show them how to do repairs, work with them, put the tools in their hand to actually do that. So they then have a skill that they can go along and then share with others, because actually it is volunteers that run these community activities, and they put on a lot of events and activities for people to come along to. So we're working very closely with them. But what we need to do is expand what we're doing. We need to look at other ideas. So the screenshots up there are the type of things that we are looking at to do. So the scrap stores, where businesses who have items that they no longer want that could be used for arts and crafts and those kind of things. There are a number of them across the UK, and we're looking at putting something like that in place. Party kits, the number of disposable plates and cups at children's and adults' parties. That doesn't need to be the case. Reusable items, and there are kits out there, none locally, but we're looking to change that. So people don't have to throw all of that stuff away, go straight into the waste stream, single use. While single-use plastics have been banned in legislation, single-use paper plates still exist. So we want to make it easier for people to reuse instead of going for single-use disposable items, and also refill as well. So refilling shampoos, pastas, food items, whatever it might be that can actually be refilled. We've got a number of water fountains across the borough, and that's just one kind of step. This is taking a little bit further for household items, things that people will use. So we're exploring those type of items as well. And related to that, we're discussing about how to get that in schools, because children learning enterprise skills is extremely important these days. And there are organisations that exist that actually take that into schools so they can learn the commercial skills, understand what it's like to run a shop. And that puts a lot more value than just the waste element, because actually the social value of reusing, remaking, repairing is actually a lot more valuable to us than getting it out of waste and throwing it away. So another one on there, which relates to the social value, baby clothes library, to explore that kind of idea. There are lots of online services where people can rent and hire clothes now, but actually it's very expensive to kit out a new child, very expensive. But if you can borrow for a fraction of that, a lot of the clothing that they will need for the periods in their lives, pay a small fee for that, return it, and it gets used over and over again. And the value for that for households who perhaps are struggling with money, but also for households who aren't. That there is a lot of principles, people living by their values, and making it a lot easier for people to do that. So we're exploring these type of avenues as part of the circular economy activities that we're doing, as well as moving along a library of things. Now, next week is actually London Repair Week. We currently have a link on the Ealing website to a zero waste map, which is shown on the screen there. And what we're doing next week is putting out a call to action for everyone in the borough to tell us about the places that do exist out there that we don't know about, because there are lots of businesses, there are lots of charitable organisations, voluntary organisations that do amazing things. And they won't have a web presence, they don't have a lot of money to get themselves online, they're all done by volunteers. What we want to do is put all of that resource together so we can encourage more people to use them, to support them, to show the value that is out there, and to support our towns and communities to do what they want to do and to follow that, which also fits with the goals that we have as a council. And then once the Acton Hub physical space is up and running, there will be space there for sewing workshops, for the fixing workshops, for small businesses. We're working with London to look at businesses that could come into small storage spaces there that could do a variety of activities to support the circular economy idea. As I've said, social value, that is the big thing. There is the only circular economy hub in existence at the moment is in Manchester. We took a visit up there last year. We being officers of various councils in West London, working with West London. And the stories that they tell, they have a bike repair element up there. And they were telling us about a teenager who was having to do a 45-minute walk to school every day because they couldn't afford to get the bus. The family didn't have a car. And he was able to get a bike for free from the hub through a referral scheme. And it then took him 10 to 15 minutes to cycle there, which meant that he was in a far better place to learn. When he got there, he wasn't as tired and could focus more on his studies. His mum was absolutely thrilled and has a glowing kind of review to the organisation that exists. you can't really put a price on that, the future of somebody actually being able to do it, because otherwise that bike would have just gone for scrap value and for recycling. So we're taking these steps and exploring these options as we're making our way through the process on the planning, the regeneration of the site to be able to build temporary buildings on there for these things to take place. So as I said, we're doing the markets. We're going to be encouraging people to tell us about what's going on locally, and we're trying to work with local organisations for the redistribution of reusable items. So one of the ones we've spoken to is Acton Homelessness Concern, who want to take items from the HRRCs or find a more efficient way of getting them from people who want to get rid of them and have no other thought about how they could get rid of them other than putting them in their bin. And hopefully very shortly you will see a travelling waste exhibition around the borough if all goes to plan in conjunction with Act for Ealing. So, does anyone have any questions?
That was just incredible. That really was just wonderful to hear, and it's just really inspiring to see and look at what the future holds for us there. So I can just see maybe invite Councillor Ball to speak. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I very much share your feelings about, going to Greenford and seeing lots and lots of things which clearly could be reused. They're just getting thrown away, and it's a terrible shame. And clearly, we ought to be doing as much as we can to improve the circular economy. The thing I'm struggling with a bit though is because yes, so the summer is only 3 months away, and I'm struggling to understand exactly what a resident of Ealing is going to be able to do. So they're going to be like, so I'm talking specifically at the hub rather than what you're doing at the market and so on. But so will there be certain types of items that they can bring there instead of taking to Greenford, that are things which potentially can be reused? Will there be like an ongoing ability to take things there for repair to have back again, or is it purely something they donate for someone else to use? So I'm just sort of struggling how a resident would use it on an ongoing basis as opposed to particular pop-up and short-term things.
Okay, so the vision for the site at the moment, and we do have a number of steps to take, including planning to go through before this could actually become a reality. So the vision at the moment is that residents will be able to come on site and use an event space where organisations like the Repair Cafe, like the West London Fixers, can hold their events, because at the moment they have to pay for those in other community locations. So there will be pop-up / regular events run by organisations for repairing and skills sharing. We're also hoping to link in with other organisations such as Groundwork or Cultivate London, so people can come along and have lessons, bring their own things, repair them, have people help them repair them and take them back again. We're also hoping that people will be able to bring some items for donation. We don't know which items yet, because we're at the moment trying to work out which organisations want what across the borough as well. So for Acton Homelessness Concern, for example, the items they're going to change month by month. So it's what is the best way to get those items redistributed? Do we use Greenford? Do we use Acton? We're not sure yet, because we're only quite early in those conversations. We are looking at the possibility of having a partnership with a food organisation that does food redistribution, so people can come on site and pick up their food box, or perhaps come along to a pay-as-you-feel market. Again, we're early partnership with these organisations. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like. There will hopefully be entrepreneurs, small businesses that want to set up in the buildings, the containers that we're going to put on site. So that might be people coming on with their item to be repaired, or it could be we might be able to get a little refill shop in there. So it all depends on who is available at the point and wants to take their business models forward. We are also looking at things like pop-up bike sales, so refurbished bikes that get taken to the HRRCs across West London, being fixed up. For example, Let's Go Southall do a lot of fixing of bikes at the Abbey Road site that's run on behalf of Brent by West London Waste. But we need an outlet to sell those items as well as the ones that go back into the community. And we are also looking at potentially, when the site is open, having some bring banks on site so people can bring textiles for donation, which would go straight to trade, and then can feed into the work that the repair cafe do with making the draft excluders from scraps of fabric and jeans, which then go and help with energy efficiency around people's homes. And we may look at some difficult to recycle items like light bulbs or batteries, having collection points like that there for when the site is open. So they're the type of things that we are exploring. It is not going to be a waste site as it was before when it was open. There will be no big skips. We are planning on filling it with containers or temporary buildings that can be used for events, for skill sharing, rather than having enough space for a skip lorry to come in and take away items. So we want to use the spaces efficiently. So it will be very varied what happens on the site. Does that help?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I guess the thing I'm a bit worried about is how you can communicate it to residents, to have a simple offer that residents know what they can go to that site for, because there are lots of fantastic ideas there, but it does seem to be a whole lot of different possibilities that all hopefully can be delivered. But I'm kind of, I think there needs to be a message that can be summed up in an elevator statement kind of thing, a message that can be summed up in a few words that residents can know exactly what can I take there to donate, what can I do with it, just in simple terms,
Forward over the next couple of months, as things become clearer, we'll be in a position to have a really clear marketing strategy to support this, because it does need the branding needs to be understood, and what it aims to do needs to be understood, and that will support in advance of the opening of the site. So that's being developed at the moment, Councillor Ball. Yeah.
Thank you. And that was El Mackenzie, just to give you a good answer there. Thank you. I didn't introduce him. Councillor Crawford, please.
That's right. Most of us don't need introducing to Mr. Mackenzie, for sure. I don't know if just to develop on some of Councillor Ball's points, and I think actually the ideas that sit behind this proposed hub are well established within Acton already. We have quite a large take up at the market already in respect of some of these initiatives. We have a number of businesses within Acton that are set up with the sustainable recycling, reuse economy involved, and indeed a number of them cited even along Churchfield Road itself, which I don't think I need to explain to anyone who sits on this panel the importance and the independent streak of that business sector. So while I say, and also, since Stirling Road disappeared briefly, the demand from residents to have something like what is being proposed has been fairly constant, I would say, for Acton councillors. So I know exactly what Councillor Ball is driving at, which is the messaging needs to be quite tight and focused. And he's absolutely right in that respect, in order to get the most out of the facility and even to drive more footfall to it so that it maximizes the possibility. But I actually think, it would be interesting, and I suppose I'm supposed to use this time for a question rather than a continual soliloquy. And I guess what it is, how far are we along the recycling journey? Because we've talked about this over a number panels. But I actually think we've got a really good story to tell on recycling within Ealing in comparison to other local boroughs, and we're quite well established. So I'd like to see how we can roll it out for it not just to be an Acton initiative. This is basically the first site that we've got. But anyway, go on.
Thanks, Sarah. I think, no, absolutely. This is almost like a test site. I mean, looking at our climate action objectives, there's no way you would just have one circular economy hub in Acton. You know, people traveling from across the borough to get to this fantastic hub. The idea is to ultimately to have one in each of the 7 towns. That would be the objective here. And Acton is the first. If it all works out fine, there's going to be a lot of learning from this site, and we're going to make mistakes as well. But the best that comes out of it, we'll be able to transfer to other locations where things may be sort of viable in a different way, perhaps. We don't know yet, but this is a test site almost. And West London Waste Authority and other West London boroughs are looking at this very, very closely, because that's going to help to inform that approach across the sub-region.
The other point I'd like to make, you talked, Sarah, a little bit about schools and some of the educational piece that will be done. I'm also quite encouraged by the interest of local residents associations and community organisations located within Acton. We've done quite a lot of work in our parks and our public spaces around promoting this message. And I think while the hub can be a location, there's absolutely no reason to piggyback on what Mr. Mackenzie's just said. We can't have sort of smaller hubs or places where other activities will go on, so that it's essentially an ethos that people buy into, and so that there are activities that can be run closer to people's homes, where people might congregate in cafes, in pop-up stores. So, you know, I'm even thinking of locations off the top of my head. So I think this is something that people want to be involved in, and people want activities that, and it fits with the only way we're going to solve the climate emergency is by with people coming together, rather than us dictating to them what needs to be done. So sort of the co-production element of this is really important, isn't it?
So, if there's no answer back on that one, I'll invite Councillor Martin to ask. Thank you.
No, and I'm going to no, great. Wonderful example of this. Number of people around this table. I'm very fortunate to be a Great British High Street judge. One of the fine examples I've seen of this has been in Narberth in Wales, and it's quite incredible. And we saw it as judges, where people were turning up with old bikes and various sort of ironry, but also a shop where literally people were bringing their own packages. So they weren't buying boxes, which they were then recycling. So that was a fine example of just seeing how this whole system works. So if they can get it in a small little town in Narberth, then I'm sure we can get it in the borough of Ealing working. My question was really answered. We're looking at Acton. I'm assuming if we can get this right, we will look at rolling it out across our 7 towns. There's, again, a fine example, and as you've mentioned, with Let's Go South, all on the bikes. So I think it's a role for every single one of us around the table here, and probably everyone in the council, to promote this and to push it. I think it's a fantastic idea. And I think it's something that I think will have longevity on, and I think you'll get a lot of support. So it's really good luck with it. Honestly, I think it's fantastic, and why we haven't done it before now, I don't know.
Well, one of the other bits of work we're doing at the moment is trying to identify all of the existing groups that are interested in this kind of stuff out there. So for anyone around the table and your other councillor colleagues, if you know of them, please do tell us about them, or tell them, or tell those organisations about us, and encourage them to get in touch, because yes, this site is important, but we aren't just focusing everything on this site at the moment. We recognise that there will be demand across the other areas, whether it's 6 towns, 7 towns, different streets within the Ealing Borough that are interested. So we're not going to say, you can't do it over there. But if you do know, please do tell us.
I'll certainly be inviting you to the High Street Task Force meeting so that you can talk to the businesses across this borough as well, definitely.
See, that'd be a fantastic idea, because I was thinking about a recommendation as to how we get the message through and cascade it to our councillor colleagues. So maybe that would be a very good start to do that. So you can work on that. So Councillor Jessel, please.
Thank you, Chair. Sarah, that was a really nice presentation, and I was very curious to ask. You mentioned you go down to the market every month. So is that for shopping or just? I was so curious because I think I better start as well.
No, I started at the council in January, and I went to my first market in Acton in February and stood on a stall and engaged with residents. We've missed this month. It's not running in April. Then we're going back as a service for May, June, and then subsequent months as well.
And we come.
You're very welcome to come along and have a look. There are some fascinating.
Just curious, you know, I drive past it, you know, sometimes it's quite busy and very colourful.
Always welcome in Acton, Councillor Jess.
I always hope that the lights are going to turn red so I can have a quick peek, you know. Yeah, so it'd be lovely to have a visit, you know.
There's a number on the reuse and recycle weeks. So there's a number of organisations that are present. So Cultivate London go along and talk about food growing, and I believe they're going to be doing a seed swap and plant swap at some point. There's the Churchfield Road Association that do book swap. There's the repair cafe that do repairs. There's Dr. Bike that comes along in the afternoon. And there's also a local business, sole trader from Acton, who does sharpening of knives, secateurs, scissors, etc. Because they're very hard to sharpen off the kind of blocks you can buy. So he does a professional job, cleans them all up, saves people buying new ones, using the ones they've had. So there's a whole range of stuff during those weeks.
Yeah, gosh, there's for choice in Acton. Thank you.
Yes, yeah, goodness me, I'm just thinking if El can pull a few strings for us to get those red lights to come on a bit more often, and maybe more people we'll have a good look when they go past. Yeah, I mean, it's just talking about like the way this is really could well bring the community together. It does remind me very much of back in the late 70s and early 80s on our estate, that what we used to do, but none of us had any money, so the mums just used to arrange to go to one person's house with a whole bin bag full of clothes and things that the kids are grown out of, and then we just pile it into the middle of the floor, have a cup of tea and coffee or a soft drink, and then we could just pile in there and pull out the things we wanted from everybody else. And that really did help a lot in terms of keeping our community together. And also now you're reminding me about the guy that used to knock on our door to sharpen our knives for us. So to make sure that everything was in working order. My goodness, we are going back to probably a better time in that sense. But just one thing I'd just like to ask about is that talking about kind of reusing items. One thing it does remind me of is that there's one time that I used a folding table for a street stall to do some political campaigning, and then one of our council colleagues screwed it up a bit too tight, so that when it came to finishing the day, 6 of us could not actually get this table unscrewed and to get it refolded. But in the end, we just had to break it deliberately just so we could put it back into someone's boot of their car. Yeah, well, we'll do later in private, but yeah. But then we managed to get. We've got the. No, we've got the table back to back to my flat, and then one time I decided, okay, that I'm going to get on the 92 bus and I'm going to lug this table down to the recycling centre there, because back in those days you could go down the bus. And then I got to the entrance there, but I didn't actually need to go in the recycling centre and lugging this table with me, because a man was coming out in his car and he said, "Hi, can I have that?" And I just said, "It's broken. You don't want it. I'm just going to dump it now." And he said, No, I'll repair it. I'll get it sorted. And so he just got it into his boot and he took it away, and it all worked out fine. So it does actually make me think about how easy is it going to be to actually transport ourselves to the circular hub, and is it going to be open to people like me who don't drive? Thank you.
Yeah, and the location is pretty well served by public transport. lots of stations nearby, tube, overground, buses running close by. That's why I also said that we want to do things in other neighbourhoods, but there will be a pedestrian only entrance to the site. That's in our design at the moment, and with limited vehicle movements inside, because we recognise that a lot of people don't have cars, and they're not going to be coming along where they have to carry big heavy things or to pick up big heavy things. So, but as I said, we want to do things elsewhere as well, because we recognise that travelling isn't that sustainable going a long way.
It's actually work out very well when we get them in every town. So that's great. So is there any further questions on that one that you want to ask? But
I mean, just
okay, I got Councillor Ball then first, and I'll just
well, just picking up on that. I mean, surely some of the things that you will want people to be able to donate will be big, heavy things. That there has to be some provision for people to turn up in cars. So it sounded like you were saying you were kind of discouraging people from driving there at all.
We're not expecting big items to be donated directly at the site. So we're not expecting someone to take a table or a fridge there. That is not the expectation. It's a skills, a reuse, repair. What we're expecting to be able to do is to get them picked up. So there's a bulky waste collection service, which is going to have more of a reuse focus in the future, and also transporting items from both Abbey Road and Greenford that are collected there for skills-based purposes. It is more of a skills event hub rather than a place where people bring their items.
That's interesting. So maybe it comes down to, with kind of larger items, thinking about libraries of things. I don't know really how that's going to really think about, because people might want to exchange those items like they probably have been doing online for some years on free cycle and stuff. I don't know how that, but things to think about anyway. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so you can do exchanging of items at smaller local events, so give and take type events, swap shops that could exist. But actually that but also it's about encouraging people to give directly to those organizations. So if you have a table that is perfectly usable, you want to get rid of it, we don't want to be the middle person for that one. We want to be able for people to be able to donate directly to the organizations that need it where possible. If you can drive it to the Acton site, you can drive it to a charity shop that looks at those, or to another location where an organisation will work on it and be all set up for that kind of activity.
Thanks, it's a very good point. So Councillor Crawford, yes, I need to say thank you.
Yeah, so it kind of leads on to what I was going to ask about the connectivity. This idea is in its infancy, clearly, in terms of what the site's going to look like, how we're going to promote it, but it's about the connectivity of creating this recycling, reuse community, isn't it? You know, there'll be ways to engage with people through the internet, put people in touch with one another. I know Councillor Rice mentioned Free Cycle, but I'm thinking, and Sarah mentioned some of the organisations that are already involved within Acton. I sort of envisage a signposting of interested residents to more local activities for them, and that it becomes something that the community kind of creates for itself. But there are very obvious places where we could host local activities, like the community centres that we've kept into use. You know, high streets such as the ones that Councillor Martin champions through the High Streets Task Force. You could get business ambassadors or community ambassadors involved in going and spreading the word. So I think sort of one of the recommendations is whether we can look at what a working party or working group of councillors or interested parties can add to this idea to make it more of their own in their locality. Because I am struck by Councillor Ball's point that people may misunderstand what we're looking at here. That, you know, conventionally, people will expect to be able to bring their, I'm not saying Councillor Rice is going to completely repeat her previous experiences, but that is the conventional model of what we're talking about, isn't it? You have a recycling centre and you bring all of your recycling stuff, or it is brought for you to a place. But actually what we're talking about here is creating events and activities to encourage people to do things that they otherwise wouldn't be doing. I think so. Sort of that community angle and making it spontaneous almost, and then chancing on that spontaneity to give people that opportunity, and also for local communities to own those actions themselves. That's going to be the driver behind creating return visits and greater activities. But also the financials behind this. Are we going to put a significant, so, you know, have we costed how much all this is going to take from our glorious Green Ealing budget, Mr. Mackenzie?
Very little. The idea behind this is that in 3 years it will be paying for itself. There is retail and income associated with the site through activities. Right, it's not going to be a site that is simply a repair shop or an event space for people just to come along. There is going to be retail involved there, and there will be fees paid for stuff. So there is a financial model that the West London Waste Authority have come up with, and there is a business case to support the proposal, and it does indicate breaking even by year 3. Now, the aim isn't to be profitable. The aim is for it to wash its face. We have another partner involved here, which is Suez. They are the waste disposal contractor. I mean, about 90% of our waste goes to Suez, is it not? To the energy from waste plant in, where was it again? Somewhere near Bath, Sevenside. So they're a major player here because they'll actually be helping to run the site. They have experience of this elsewhere. And they are putting in a significant amount into this. I think at the end of the term, you know, ourselves and the West London Waste Authority will underwrite a certain minimal amount of cost here, but it isn't significant. Putting into context, from energy from waste, all that stuff that we send to be, I hate that word, but it is incinerated, but it creates energy. Now that goes to National Grid and we get an income from it. And the last few years, because of energy prices, that income has been really quite significant. And that has helped. And because it is one-off, you can't build it into, you know, long-term revenue spend, but it does create a buffer to help with things. For example, next year, it's likely that that income will be half the amount it was last year. So whilst we can't build that into future planning with any confidence, what we do know is there's be a little bit that we can probably take to underwrite this venture if there are any problems in the future. So we're just putting little bits and pieces aside to help with that. So financially, we're pretty solid.
And I'll ask on sort of further contributors with the ACT and angle, you know, have we approached organisations that are doing major projects in the vicinity, so that have all got sort of sustainability supposedly at their heart? I'm thinking of HS2, Crossrail, the OPDC, in respect of some of that business planning, construction, a specialty. They may have some skills or some apprentices or some people who might want to be involved in this, and they could certainly help with the marketing and promotion. Is it something we've looked at?
Not specifically, but I think there's definitely, when we look at HS2 activity in the area and the impact that's going to have on East Acton, absolutely. I think that there's probably a conversation that we can have. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
You're making me wonder if it's worthwhile us proposing that there be a kind of a champion, because we've probably got kind of the AGM, the new municipal year coming up. Is there some kind of champion within the councillors who could champion this cause and actually get the message out there in the same way that you might have a champion of other causes? So I don't know, because so I don't know if it's the kind of thing. I'm not necessarily suggesting one person.
Are you
yet, but-
asking us to nominate right now?
No. Just saying if it's the kind of thing, if that's where you're really coming, because you were talking about maybe getting like a group together with the councillors. I'm wondering if that might be a way forward.
Well, I mean,
Is it
but
practical
I'm
what you're saying?
thinking, like, going on what Councillor Martin was
Mm.
saying, I don't think it's something that should be within all elected members' directives, really.
Mm.
We should all be champions of activities like this. And I think actually to single out one person to do it would be sort of, and if we're trying to build it for everyone to do, then if we each do a bit going out of this meeting, I know a lot more about it than I did before. And perhaps because the first one is in Acton, then the Acton councillors should take more of a lead. I'm certainly happy to propose that to my Acton colleagues. But I think if we've got these aims around net zero and boost, we still want to boost our recycling rate. I'm sure. I think that's something everybody can get involved in, and actually devising some mechanism whereby we can all do it would be really helpful.
Yes, as I was saying before about cascading that knowledge across to everybody and make sure that people know what's going on. Yeah, yes, please.
I think initially the best place for that, or the start point, is probably the High Street Task Force, because that's sort of ready made to kick off that conversation. Because in addition to this, one of the objectives that we have over the next couple of years is to introduce a low waste neighbourhood. So we haven't decided exactly where that is yet, have we, Sarah?
Everywhere.
What's a low one as the name? Yeah, good question. I think it's where there's an intense focus on recycling, reuse activity, circular economy activities, etc., where you can measure the impact of your inputs in a concentrated way. And it really is a culture and behavior change thing that you would hope to instill across a particular area. Now, it's really ambitious to say we're going to do that for the whole council. Resource intensive and unrealistic. So when we talk about neighbourhoods, it's simply just to pick almost like a test area. And again, it's to look at all those interventions in an area. If successful and they're the right things, then do that somewhere else. And once you've embedded that cultural and behaviour change in that area, and that takes, and obviously that's not just residents here, that really does include, to almost a greater extent, businesses. So it's a slightly different angle that we're going for with this. But again, Dan, I mean, your comments about individual members taking this on and ownership in their ward, absolutely. And it's when that's when that will come into play. But I think as a start point, personally, the High Street's task force is a really good place to begin having that conversation.
Are there incentives?
Looks like I've just got another role then.
Yeah, Councillor Martin's gone home. It's another job, it's true. Thanks. But we've got a recommendation to put on the paperwork to show that we did some work tonight and we got some ideas out.
I think in all seriousness, I think this is something that, I don't know what scrutiny looks like in the new municipal year, and I guess there'll be other scrutiny committees that will lead the way on shaping that. But I know we're getting towards the point of I find these committees looking at particular areas like this one really interesting, because you can delve down into a particular topic. And there's some marry-up between the two topics that we're looking at. But I'd certainly be interested in this panel having a look at following the progress of this idea, and to sort of hone some of those. I'm quite interested in Councillor Ball's I wouldn't call it skepticism, his gentle encouragement, nurturing of this idea, and how we design. So how we design this idea to be more effective, and one of the things around that is how you incentivize behaviour change. Whether you can in a low waste neighbourhood. But my main point is this should be right at the top of topics to look at or reports to commission for if this panel were to continue. We'd be sort of a few months down the line to have a sort of progress report on how is the circular hub going, and where can we, if it's, and I'm sure it will be going well, but if it is going well, what are the steps to replicate this in another community or in another space?
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense, because it does match up really with our kind of overall aims of the council generally. And of course, it's one of the most major things. The climate emergency is one of the most major topics that really affects the world and affects Ealing. So it's a good idea, the fact that we've continued touching on that subject for the past few years, and hopefully we'll continue to do so. So has anyone else got any further points or questions on this? That's great. Well, thank you ever so much to Mackenzie, and also to Sarah Ellis for really enlightening us and feeding our imaginations on that one. So thank you very much. Yeah. So in that case, we can go on to the next. You've got the recommendations that we've put together so far for this panel, and on top of the actual recommendation itself, we've got feedback from officers. So I don't know if anyone had looked through that and had any comments they wanted to make on that. That's all right. Okay. Well, yes. So I mean, certainly there were 3 of the recommendations that came back rejected from when we discussed the parking report. I think there was just something about having the dedicated CEOs in each town, and so that one was rejected because it just said that kind of thing might work in the short term, but there's also a little bit more talk about that. So what I'm just hoping is that maybe we could look at maybe expanding on that and just saying that we want to make sure that gets reviewed over time, to make sure that the process is actually working, that's in place. So yes, please, Councillor Crawford.
Certainly the ones that were rejected in regards to the parking report, I do think there's probably a bit more scope now that we've taken some of the decisions that we have, as we're looking at the flexibility of the service to change, given I'm not saying that we should fire them straight back at Gina and Earl, but I think the spirit of what we are looking to do can be adopted, if not the letter of what we're trying to do, because at least in 2 of the cases, in respect of 2 of the recommendations, at least part of the reason suggests that approach is being tackled already. It's just about maybe you can explore how that is going, and whether we just have a bit more of an explanation of the success or otherwise of those measures. Certainly it doesn't seem to have numbers on my thing, but certainly the one where we're talking about Greener Ealing taking advice from tech and the WLA. Well, it looks like I would expect them to be doing that anyway, and that seems to be the tenor of but actually, what does that advice entail? How is that delivered? If it has any benefits, how has that shaped our service? And maybe we can have a look at that later in, assuming that this magnificent panel should continue into the next. Perhaps we could have some information about how we're redesigning, particularly the parking service, with those things in mind, because I know there've been a number of changes.
I totally agree on that, and so it's something that this does need to be looked at, and maybe somebody could say when the parking report is looked at next time round, if it could be highlighted that these are matters that we just wanted to have an update on how well things are going here, because I'm very interested, and it comes down to these the CEOs in terms of how is it working. If it says it works in the short term to put them in there, dedicated towns. Well, if it tends to peter out a little bit along the way because people get to be more too familiar with each other, well, then what other schemes are in place in order to make sure that it continues to work? System works.
Part of that is the tasking and direction of those CEOs, and as I understand it, like, well, I mean, certainly not to delve into my own caseload, but there is the ability to review and see how we respond to parking pressure and how we do that. So I think that could also form a sort of small update the next time we come to look at the parking report, which previously has been quite dry.
We've made it into something. Mr. Mackenzie would like to perhaps give it again.
But is it appropriate for me to comment on?
Yes, please. Did you hear? This is actually a real gift. Thank you.
What I would say is that with the transfer of parking operations to Green Ealing, there will be opportunities. Okay. Under the Serco contract, which was fairly rigid, and they weren't really interested in the borough, the big company who do parking enforcement, and their level of engagement with officers was pitiful, to be honest. So to actually manage their CEOs effectively and get the flexibility you need, and for them to be targeted and tasked in the right way, was really quite difficult. The reality is that a couple of Ealing officers were in effect managing the Serco operation because Serco had gone AWOL practically. Now that's a failure on behalf of the council, I would have to say, because if we've got a strong enough contract in place, there are measures that should prevent Serco from doing that. But don't talk about that because that's history. But moving forward, not only have we got a much better relationship with the contractor as in Green Ealing, the council is the shareholder and basically owns the business. So it has a lot more control over the operations. So there is scope to do a lot more and to be a lot more flexible than Serco were. And it's probably going to be useful to report back to this committee on progress and any of the new initiatives that come forward as a result of the transfer to GEL.
So thank you very much for that, Mackenzie. So that basically means that even though the recommendations are down as rejected, I think we've actually gained an awful lot from talking about this and discussing it. So that's good. So we've got something to move on to. Yes, so we'll obviously there'll be further recommendations to come from this meeting. So maybe we'll do the usual. Might be easiest if maybe myself and the vice chair discuss and put that together based on what would come from the meeting itself. We won't make up our own. We'll just but base it on what people have said tonight, because so yes, that's great. Thank you. Yes. Yep. Okay. So in that case, I think we've pretty much are at the end of that. So
can I just say something?
And so I think Councillor Ball would like to say something, please. Yes.
Yeah. I'd just like to move a vote of thanks to you, Chair, for the enthusiastic and efficient way that you've run this committee over the course of the municipal year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ball. I appreciate that. And also I'd like to say thank you to everybody, everyone who's been on the panel, and to Anne-Marie here, who's been fantastic holding it all together for me, all the officers who've come along, all the experts who've come along to speak to us. It's just been a really incredibly successful year, and I'm glad that we've got a lot out of it, and we know that we've got a lot to look forward to in Ealing when it comes down to housing and environment. So thank you, everybody, and wish